"She's my wife," Mafia boss told the doctor, but the woman on the bed had never met him before. The world came back in a haze of blinding white light and the sharp, chemical scent of antiseptic. There was no gradual awakening, no gentle drift from sleep to consciousness. It was a sudden, jarring return, accompanied by a throbbing pain that radiated from the base of her skull and wrapped around her temples like a vice. The woman on the bed gasped, her lungs seizing as the cold air of the hospital room hit them. She tried to sit up, but her body refused to obey. Her limbs felt heavy, as if they were made of lead, and a dull ache pulsed in her ribs with every beat of her heart. A rhythmic beeping sound filled the room, keeping time with the frantic pace of her pulse. She turned her head to the side, the movement sending a fresh spike of nausea through her stomach. A monitor stood there, tracing green lines against a black screen. Beyond it, a window revealed nothing but the gray, weeping sky of a rainy afternoon. She squeezed her eyes shut and tried to reach backward into her mind. Searching for a reference point, she looked for a memory of waking up that morning, of getting dressed, of where she was going. She grasped for a name, a face, a street address. There was nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of painkillers. It was a terrifying void. It was not just that she did not know where she did not know who she was. The silence in her head was deafening. The sound of the door opening made her flinch. A man in a white coat walked in, his eyes scanning a clipboard before they landed on her. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped, but his expression softened when he saw her eyes were open. "You're awake," the doctor said, his voice professional but gentle. He moved to the side of the bed, checking the monitors. "Can you hear me? Can you tell me your name?" She opened her mouth, but her throat was dry, frantic for moisture. She swallowed hard and tried again. Her voice was a raspy whisper, foreign to her own ears. "I don't know." The doctor paused, his pen hovering over the paper. "You have been in a severe car accident. You suffered a significant concussion and some bruising to the chest and ribs. Confusion is normal." "No," she whispered, the panic rising in her chest, tightening her throat. "I don't mean I am confused. I mean, I don't know who I am." The doctor frowned, stepping closer to shine a penlight into her eyes. "Retrograde amnesia is not uncommon with head trauma of this magnitude. It often clears up as the swelling goes down. Do you remember the accident, the car? No? Do you remember anything, a phone number, a face?" She shook her head, wincing as the pain flared again. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and frustrating. She was a ghost in her own body. Before the doctor could ask another question, the heavy wooden door to the room swung open again. This time, the entry was not quiet. It commanded attention. The air in the room seemed to shift instantly, growing heavier, charged with an unseen static electricity. A man walked in. He was tall, towering over the doctor, with broad shoulders encased in a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than the hospital wing itself. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was striking in its severity, high cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed by a day of stubble, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He did not look at the doctor. His gaze was fixed solely on her. For a moment, time seemed to suspend itself. The woman on the bed felt a jolt go through her, not of recognition, but of primal instinct. Her body went rigid. Every nerve ending stood at attention. She did not know this man, yet the way he looked at her, intense, possessive, and terrifyingly relieved, made her breath hitch. "Who are you?" the doctor asked, stepping between the bed and the intruder, though his body language betrayed his intimidation. "This is a restricted recovery room, family only." The stranger stopped a few feet from the bed. He ignored the doctor's question, his eyes still locked on hers. He looked as though he had walked through fire to get to this room. He took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling beneath the fine fabric of his shirt. "I am her family," the man said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth like velvet but with an edge of steel beneath it. It was the voice of a man who was used to being obeyed. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a folded document, handing it to the doctor without breaking eye contact with the woman. "She is my wife," he stated. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The woman's heart hammered against her ribs. Wife? She stared at him, searching his face for any spark of familiarity. There was nothing. No flash of memory, no warmth of recognition, just the cold, terrifying realization that a stranger was claiming her. She started, her voice trembling. "I don't know you." The man's expression did not waver, though a flicker of pain seemed to pass through his dark eyes before he masked it. "The doctor said you might be confused. Emily." Emily. Was that her name? It sounded pleasant, soft, but it did not feel like hers. It felt like a label being pasted onto a blank jar. The doctor unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the text. He hesitated, looking from the document to the moon and back to the patient. "Mr. Moretti," the doctor read, his tone shifting from authority to deference. I see. The identification we found at the crash site was damaged, so we had her listed as a Jane Doe. This marriage certificate appears to be in order." "I want her moved," Damian Moretti said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "I have a medical team preparing a suite at my estate. I do not want her staying here a moment longer than necessary." "She's not stable enough for transport yet," the doctor protested weakly. "She has a severe concussion. She needs observation." Damian finally looked at the doctor. The look was cold, dismissive, and terrifyingly calm. "Then observing her is exactly what my private physicians will do. Better than you can. Prepare the discharge papers. I will handle the liability." The doctor swallowed, nodding quickly before retreating to the corner to make a phone call, his voice hushed and nervous. Damian stepped closer to the bed. He moved with the predatory grace of a panther, silent and controlled. He stopped right beside her, his hip brushing against the metal rail. Up close, he smelled of expensive leather, rain, and something uniquely masculine that made her head spin. "Emily," he said softly. She pressed herself back into the pillows, her eyes wide. "I don't know who you are," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, I don't remember anything." "I know," Damian said. He reached out a hand as if to touch her face, then stopped mid-air. He saw the way she flinched, the way her pupils dilated in fear, and he slowly lowered his hand to the mattress. Gripping the white sheet instead, the restraint in his movement was palpable. "The police called me. They told me about the crash. You're my husband?" she asked, the words tasting like ash. "Yes," Damian lied. He said it with such conviction that even the doubt in her own mind wavered. "We have been married for 2 years. We had an argument last night. You were angry. You took the car and drove off. It was raining. I should never have let you leave." He looked down, his jaw tightening. "This is my fault." She studied him. He was beautiful in a dangerous, jagged way. If she was truly his wife, why did she feel this instinctive urge to run? But then, where would she run to? She was broken, memoryless, and alone in a world she did not recognize. This man, with his power and his intense focus, was the only anchor she had. "Why don't I have a ring?" she asked, glancing at her bare left hand. Damian did not miss a beat. "You took it off before you left the house. You threw it at me." He let out a short, humorless laugh that sounded full of regret. "You have a temper, Emily. It is one of the things I love about you." He looked at her then, and for a second, the mask slipped. The intensity in his gaze softened into something that looked like profound relief, mixed with a strange, haunting sadness. "I'm just glad you are alive. Everything else, memory, arguments. We will fix it. I will take care of you." The promise sounded like a vow. It unsettled her. Yet a treacherous part of her exhausted mind wanted to believe him. She wanted to be taken care of. She wanted to be safe. "I am scared," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I know," Damian said. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in her chest. "And you have every right to be. But you do not need to be scared of me. I will never let anything hurt you again." By the time evening fell, The hospital room had transformed. Damien had made good on his word, though the doctor had managed to negotiate a 24-hour observation period before she could be moved. In response, Damien had effectively annexed the entire floor. Emily lay in bed, feigning sleep, watching through her eyelashes as the environment around her changed. The regular nurses were gone, replaced by two stern-faced women in private uniforms who moved efficiently and spoke only when spoken to. They deferred to Damien with a reverence that bordered on fear. But it was the men in the hallway that truly unnerved her. Through the glass panel of her door, she could see them, men in dark suits, standing with their hands clasped in front of them or arms crossed, their eyes scanning the corridor. They were not hospital security. They moved differently. Sharper, more alert. Every time a doctor or orderly approached, one of the men would step forward to intercept them, checking ID badges before allowing them to pass. It felt less like a hospital and more like a fortress. Damien had spent most of the afternoon in the room with her, sitting in the uncomfortable vinyl chair by the window, taking calls on his phone. He spoke in low tones, occasionally switching to a language she did not understand. Italian, she guessed. His voice was clipped, angry, issuing orders that sounded like military commands. "Find him," she had heard him snarl at one point, his back turned to her. "I do not care what it costs. Turn the city upside down." When he had turned back and seen her watching him, the anger had vanished instantly. Replaced by that calm, solicitous mask, he had asked if she needed water, if the pillow was comfortable, if the pain was manageable. Now, night has fully descended. The rain was lashing against the window pane, a relentless rhythm against the glass. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of the monitors and a small lamp in the corner. Emily drifted in and out of a restless sleep. Her mind, untethered from memory, began to conjure images that made no sense. In her dream, she was not in a car. She was standing in a kitchen, a small, cramped space that smelled of flour and vanilla. There was a man standing behind her. She could not see his face. It was a blur of static, but she could feel his breath on her neck. It was not the scent of leather and rain that Damien carried. It was something else. Cigarettes and cheap aftershave. "Emma," the voice whispered. It was scratchy, menacing. "You think you can hide?" Then came the sound of a crash, metal screeching on metal, glass shattering, the sensation of falling. Emily jerked awake with a gasp, her heart pounding against her bruised ribs. "Shh, you are safe." The voice came from the darkness beside her. Damien was there. He had moved the chair right next to the bed. He was leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together. He had discarded his jacket and loosened his tie, the top button of his white shirt undone. He looked exhausted, shadows bruising the skin beneath his eyes. "I had a bad dream," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know," Damien said softly. "You were calling out." "Did I say a name?" she asked, a sudden hope sparking in her chest. "Did I remember something?" Damien hesitated. The pause was fractional, almost imperceptible, but she caught it. "No," he said. "You were just making sounds of distress." He reached out and took her hand. His palm was large, warm, and calloused. It engulfed hers completely, for the first time since she had woken up. She did not flinch. The warmth of his skin seeped into hers, grounding her. She looked at him, really looked at him. In the dim light, he was staring at her face as if he were memorizing it, tracing every bruise and cut with his eyes. There was a raw vulnerability in his expression that contradicted the powerful man who had barked orders at the doctors earlier. He looked like a man who had come to the edge of a cliff and looked down into the abyss. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. The words were not meant for her. Not really. They were a confession to the universe. "When I got the call, I thought I was too late." Emily felt a strange pang in her chest. It was not memory, but it was emotion. Her heart reacted to his pain. It ached for him. How could she feel this for a stranger? "Damien?" She tested the name on her tongue. It felt heavy, significant. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver up her arm. "Yes, Emily? If we were fighting," she said slowly, trying to piece together the narrative he had given her. What was it about? Damien looked down at their joined hands, his jaw clenched, a muscle feathering in his cheek. I was trying to control you, he said, his voice low and rough. I was trying to keep you safe, but I held on too tight. You wanted freedom. I wanted certainty. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. I promised myself, sitting in this chair while you were unconscious, if you woke up, I would do it differently. I will not make those mistakes again. It sounded like the truth. It felt like the truth. But deep in the back of her mind, a tiny alarm bell was still ringing. It was the way the guards stood outside. It was the way the doctor had trembled. It was the blurry face in her dream that did not match this man's features. You are staring at me, Damien murmured, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. I'm trying to remember you, she answered honestly. My head says I have never seen you before. But my hands, she said, looking down at where he held her, they don't want to let go. Damien froze. He closed his eyes for a second, exhaling a shaky breath. When he opened them again, the fire in them burned brighter. He lifted her hand slowly, bringing it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, his gaze never leaving hers. The sensation was electric, shocking her system more than the pain of her injuries. Trust your hands, Emily, he whispered against her skin. The mind can be tricked, the memory can fail, but the body knows what belongs to it. He lowered her hand back to the bed but kept his fingers intertwined with hers. Sleep now. I will be here when you wake up. I am not going anywhere. Emily watched him as her eyelids grew heavy, pulled down by the exhaustion and the medication. She watched the way he settled back into the chair, his body angled toward her, a silent sentinel in the night. He claimed to be her husband. He claimed to love her. He was powerful, dangerous, and protective. And for tonight, as the rain battered the glass and the shadows stretched long across the floor, she decided to let the lie, if it was a lie, be her shelter. She closed her eyes. The rhythm of his breathing, the last thing she heard before the darkness took her again. But even in sleep, the question lingered, haunting and unanswered. Who are you really? Damien Moretti? And who am I? The drive to the estate took nearly an hour, leaving the city lights far behind in the rearview mirror. The sleek black sedan moved silently through the rain-slicked streets, flanked by two other vehicles that moved in perfect synchronization with them. Emily sat in the back seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching the world pass by through tinted glass. Damien sat beside her, close enough that she could smell the faint, masculine scent of sandalwood and rain that clung to his coat, but far enough away that their bodies did not touch. He was on his phone again, speaking in low, clipped tones, but every few minutes he would glance at her, his expression softening instantly as if he were switching masks. We're almost there, he said, ending the call and sliding the phone into his pocket. You are tired. I'm okay, Emily lied. Her head was throbbing, a rhythmic ache behind her eyes, and her ribs felt like they were encased in iron. But the fear was louder than the pain. She was going home with a stranger. The car slowed as they approached a pair of massive wrought iron gates. They were imposing, topped with sharp spikes, set into a high stone wall that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness of the woods. A guard stepped out of a small booth, nodded once at the driver, and the gates swung open with a heavy, mechanical groan. As they wound up the long driveway, the house came into view. It was less a home and more a fortress disguised as a mansion, built of gray stone and looming against the stormy sky. It had the sharp angles and cold grandeur of a place designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Security lights flooded the grounds, illuminating manicured hedges and statues that looked like silent sentinels. This is ours? Emily asked, her voice small. Yes, Damien said, watching her reaction carefully. Do you recognize it? Emily searched the facade, looking for a spark of familiarity, a memory of standing on that balcony, or walking through those heavy oak doors. There was nothing, just a hollow sense of displacement. No, she whispered. It looks very Big. You used to say it was too big, Damien murmured, a hint of a sad smile playing on his lips. You wanted to fill it with noise, with life. The car stopped, and before the driver could move, Damien was out, opening her door. He offered his hand. She hesitated for a heartbeat, looking at his open palm, broad, capable, dangerous, before placing her hand in his. His fingers closed over hers, warm and firm, anchoring her as she stepped out into the cool night air. Inside. The foyer was a cavern of marble and crystal. A double staircase swept up to the second floor, and a chandelier the size of a small car hung from the vaulted ceiling. A line of staff members stood waiting, 3 women in crisp uniforms and an older man who looked like a butler from a period drama. "Welcome home, Mrs. Moretti," the older man said, bowing his head slightly. The title sent a shiver down her spine. Mrs. Moretti. It sounded like a costume she had been forced to wear. "Thank you," she stammered, feeling like an imposter. Damien guided her past them, cutting the introductions short. "Mrs. Moretti needs rest. Have Dr. Aris waiting in the master suite immediately." "Of course, sir." The next few days passed in a blur of routine and quiet luxury. Emily was installed in a bedroom that was larger than any apartment she could imagine living in. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds, a fireplace that was always lit, and a bed so soft it felt like sleeping on a cloud. Dr. Aris, a private physician with cold hands and no sense of humor, checked her vitals 3 times a day. He treated her with a deferential distance, never meeting her eyes for too long, always addressing her as Mrs. Moretti. The nurses were the same, efficient, polite, and completely impenetrable. They were not there to be her friends. They were there to ensure she did not die. And then there was Damien. He was the center of the orbit in which the entire house revolved. He left early in the morning and returned late. But whenever he was home, he was with her. Emily watched him with a mix of suspicion and fascination. She expected him to be demanding. He was her husband, after all, and she was living in his house, eating his food, sleeping in his bed, though he had graciously taken the guest room down the hall, claiming he did not want to disturb her recovery. She expected him to push for intimacy, for memory, for something she could not give. But he did not. He was terrifyingly patient. He would sit with her in the library, reading documents while she stared out the window. He would bring her tea. He would answer her endless, frantic questions, but always with answers that felt like water slipping through her fingers. "Where did we meet?" she asked him one afternoon, sitting in the sunroom. "At a gala," Damien said, not looking up from his tablet. "You were wearing a red dress. You spilled champagne on my shoes. What is my favorite color? Blue, like the ocean after a storm." "Do I have parents? Siblings?" "No," Damien said, and this time he did look at her. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "It was just you and me. Emily, we were all we had." It was isolating. Hearing that, it meant she had no one else to call, no one else to verify his story. She was entirely dependent on him. Yet, despite the fear, her body betrayed her. Whenever he walked into the room, her pulse quickened, not just from nerves, but from an undeniable magnetic pull. When he handed her a cup of coffee, and his fingers grazed hers, a jolt of electricity shot up her arm that had nothing to do with fear. She found herself watching his hands, how strong they looked, how gentle they could be when he adjusted the blanket over her legs. It was confusing. Her mind shouted at the stranger, but her blood whispered husband. On the 4th night, a storm rolled in. It started with low rumbles in the distance, but by midnight, it was a violent tempest. Thunder shook the stone foundations of the manor, and lightning turned the sky into a strobe light of jagged white veins. Emily woke with a gasp as a crack of thunder sounded like a gunshot right outside her window. The room was pitch black. Panic, irrational and primal, seized her. She scrambled out of bed, her breath coming in short, terrified gasps. She needed light. She needed to not be alone. She ran into the hallway, the marble floor cold against her bare feet. The house was massive and filled with shadows. Another crash of thunder made her cry out, covering her ears. "Emily?" The voice came from the top of the stairs. Damien. He was wearing dark lounge pants and a t-shirt that clung to his chest, looking like he had just come from the gym or had been pacing. He saw her standing there, trembling in her thin silk nightgown, and he was moving before she could speak. He crossed the distance between them in long strides. He did not grab her. He stopped a foot away, his presence like a solid wall against the chaos of the storm. "It is okay," he said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the noise of the rain. "It is just a storm. The house is grounded. You are safe." "I hate it," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know why, but I hate it." "I know," Damien said. "Come." He led her not back to her room, but downstairs to the kitchen. It was a warm, cavernous space, with copper pots hanging from the ceiling and a massive slate island. He turned on the warm, under-cabinet lights, banishing the shadows. "Sit," he commanded gently, pointing to a stool. He moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, filling a kettle, retrieving a tin of cocoa. The domesticity of it was jarring. Here was the man who commanded armies of guards, making hot chocolate at 2 a.m. "You used to hide in the pantry during storms," Damien said, his back to her as he stirred the milk. "I would have to coax you out with chocolate." Emily managed a weak smile. "I sound like a child." "No," Damien turned, sliding a steaming mug across the granite counter toward her. "You sounded like someone who had survived too much noise." He leaned his hips against the counter, sipping his own mug, watching her. The storm raged outside, but here, it was quiet, safe. "Are you hungry?" he asked suddenly. Emily realized she was a little. "Good. I make excellent carbonara." "At 2 a.m? The best time for it." For the next hour, the heavy atmosphere of the house lifted. Damien cooked, and he let her help. She chopped parsley, her knife skills surprisingly clumsy, while he handled the pancetta and eggs. He made fun of her chopping. She made fun of his fastidiousness. For the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, she laughed. It was a rusty, surprised sound, bubbling up when flour puffed onto Damien's black t-shirt, leaving a white handprint. He froze, looking down at the flour on his chest, then up at her. His eyes were dark, intense. "You laughed," he said softly. Emily stopped, the smile fading slightly as the tension returned. "I did." She reached out instinctively to brush the flour from his shirt, then stopped, realizing what she was doing. Her hand hovered over his chest. Damien did not move away. He stepped closer, closing the gap until her hand was resting against the solid warmth of his pectoral muscle. She could feel his heart beating beneath her palm, steady, heavy, powerful. "Emily," he breathed. Her breath hitched. She looked up at him, her lips parting. The air between them crackled, hotter than the stove. He reached out, his hand cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. He lowered his head, his eyes dropping to her mouth. She stiffened, not out of fear, but out of a sudden, overwhelming rush of sensation that she did not know how to process. Damien felt her tension. He stopped inches from her lips. He closed his eyes for a second, inhaling sharply, fighting a battle she could not see. Then, slowly, agonizingly, he pulled away. He stepped back, his hand falling from her face, leaving her skin cold where he had touched it. "The pasta is ready," he said, his voice rougher than before. He turned back to the stove, his shoulders rigid. Emily stood there, her hand still tingling, wondering why the loss of his touch felt more painful than the storm outside. The next day, the house felt different. The boundaries were back up. Damien was gone before she woke up, leaving a note saying he had business in the city, left to her own devices. Emily's curiosity began to morph into restlessness. She walked the halls of the East Wing, a section of the house she had not explored yet. The portraits on the walls were old oil paintings of stern men who looked vaguely like Damien, ancestors of a lineage she supposedly married into. At the end of the hallway, she found a heavy mahogany door. Unlike the others, it had a modern, digital keypad lock installed above the brass handle. She reached for the handle, just to check, but it was locked tight. "Mrs. Moretti," Emily jumped, spinning around. One of the housekeepers, a woman named Elena, was standing behind her. Her expression was tight, her hands wringing her apron. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Elena said. "Mr. Moretti gave strict instructions. No one is allowed to enter that room, not even the cleaning staff." "What is inside?" Emily asked, her heart beating a little faster. "I do not know, ma'am. It has been locked for a long time. Please, for your own sake, do not go near it. He gets very angry." The warning hung in the air. He gets very angry. It was the first crack in the perfect husband facade. Damien had been nothing but gentle. But here was evidence of a temper, of secrets. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, but paranoia is worse. All afternoon. Emily thought about that door. What was he hiding? Was it proof of his business? Or was it something worse? Was it proof that she wasn't who he said she was? That night, Damien returned late. He looked exhausted, his shirt rumpled, a bruise darkening on his knuckles that he tried to hide. He ate dinner with her in silence, then retreated to his study. Emily waited until the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 1 in the morning. The house was silent. She slipped out of her room, barefoot, moving like a ghost through the corridors. She did not know the code to the keypad, but she had noticed something earlier. The wood around the strike plate was old, the mechanism was high-tech, but the door frame was antique. She had found a letter opener in the library, a thin, sharp piece of brass. She knelt by the door, her hands trembling. She worked the brass blade into the gap between the door and the frame, bypassing the electric bolt and targeting the old latch mechanism. It was a long shot, something she must have seen in a movie, but her hands moved with a dexterity that surprised her. Click. The door groaned and swung inward a fraction of an inch. Emily held her breath. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was cold. It smelled of dust and old paper. She fumbled for a light switch on the wall and flicked it on. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. It was a shrine. The walls were covered in framed photographs, dozens of them, hundreds, and they were all of her, or a woman who looked exactly like her. There were candid shots of the woman walking down a street, laughing at a cafe, reading a book on a park bench. There were formal shots. And there, in the center of the room, was a massive, blown-up portrait of the woman in a wedding dress, her head thrown back in laughter, Damien's arm around her waist. He was looking at her with a devotion that bordered on worship. Emily walked toward it, her legs shaking. She touched the glass. The woman had her eyes, her nose, her hair, but there was something off. The smile. It was too wide, too carefree. Emily looked at her own reflection in the glass. She looked haunted, sharper. This woman looked soft. And the dress, it was a ball gown, covered in lace. Emily hated lace. She didn't know how she knew that, but she knew it with a certainty that rattled her bones. She would never wear that dress. "I told you not to go in here." The voice came from the doorway, low, resigned. Emily spun around. Damien was leaning against the doorframe. He didn't look angry. He looked defeated. He was watching her look at the photos. "Who is she?" Emily whispered, pointing at the wall. "Is that me?" Damien walked into the room. He didn't try to stop her. He walked over to a small table covered in ticket stubs and dried flowers, mementos. "Yes," he said. "That is you. Before? Why does it feel wrong?" Emily's voice rose, bordering on hysteria. "Why do I look at these pictures and feel nothing? Why do I hate that dress?" Damien picked up a small photo strip from a photo booth. "Because the accident changed you." Emily. "Trauma rewrites the brain. You lost your memories, but you also lost pieces of who you were." He looked up at her, his eyes burning. "I keep these locked away because it hurts to look at them. It hurts to see the ghost of the woman I married when the woman standing in front of me looks at me like a stranger." He stepped closer, crowding her space. "I didn't want you to see this because I didn't want you to feel pressured to be her again. I wanted you to be whoever you are now. The explanation was perfect. It was tragic, romantic, and logical. And yet, Emily's stomach churned. It felt rehearsed. "I don't believe you," she whispered, though she wanted to. Damien stared at her. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. He looked at her mouth, then her eyes. You don't have to believe me," he said roughly. "You just have to let me prove it." They moved at the same time. He reached for her, and she didn't back away. They collided in the hallway, just outside the room of ghosts. Damien's hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back. He didn't ask this time. He didn't hesitate. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a starving man finally finding water. His mouth was hot, demanding, searing against hers. He groaned low in his throat, pulling her body flush against his. Emily's hands clutched the lapels of his shirt. Her mind was screaming danger, danger, danger. But her body was singing. She opened her mouth to him, kissing him back with a desperation that matched his own. Her fingers slid up into his hair, gripping tight. It fits. That was the terrifying part. The angle of their heads, the way her body molded to his, the rhythm of the kiss. It felt practiced. It felt familiar. It felt real. Damien pulled back, breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were blown wide, dark and swirling with emotion. Emily stared at him, her lips swollen, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She clutched the doorframe to keep from falling. "Why?" she gasped, her voice breaking. "Why does it feel so real?" Damien ran his thumb over her lip, his expression one of tortured longing. Because the heart remembers what the mind forgets. "Emily, you are my wife. This is the only truth that matters." He stepped back, leaving her trembling in the hallway, the taste of him still on her lips. He closed the door to the room of photos, the click of the lock sounding like a gunshot in the silence. "Go to bed," he rasped, turning away from her, "before I break every promise I made to myself about keeping my distance." Emily watched him walk away into the shadows, the taste of the kiss lingering like a sweet poison. She touched her lips, terrified. Because he was right. It felt real. But if it was real, why did she still feel like she was sleeping in the devil's bed? The fractures in the illusion began small, like hairline cracks in a porcelain vase, barely visible until the light hit them just right. It started with the sounds. Emily was sitting in the solarium, a book of poetry open on her lap that she wasn't reading, when the silence of the estate was shattered, not by a noise in the room, but by a noise in her head. It was the sharp, distinct ding of a service bell. The sound was so clear, so piercing, that she flinched, looking around for the source. But there was only the quiet rustle of the wind in the trees outside. Then came the smell. It wasn't the expensive beeswax polish of the mansion or Damien's sandalwood cologne. It was the heavy, greasy scent of frying bacon and stale coffee. It filled her nose, choking her, accompanied by the phantom sensation of aching feet and a sticky plastic menu in her hands. A voice echoed in the back of her mind, shouting over the din of clattering plates, "Emma, table 4 needs a refill." And then a child's laughter, bright, bubbling, and entirely out of place in this childless fortress. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her palms against her temples. The images flashed like strobe lights, a checkered floor, a red apron, a man in a trucker hat leaving a dollar bill on a Formica table. Emma. The name reverberated in her skull. It felt like a key turning in a rusted lock. She opened her eyes, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The solarium was the same, luxurious, sterile, safe. But the feeling of safety had evaporated. The story Damien had spun for her, the story of the wealthy wife and the gala and the arguments, felt suddenly thin, like paper mache dissolving in water. She needed proof. Damien had left the estate an hour ago. He had been tense, his phone glued to his ear, barking orders about securing the perimeter and flushing out the rat. He had kissed her forehead before leaving, his lips lingering a second too long, his eyes searching hers with that desperate intensity that always unsettled her. Now, the house was hers to search. She avoided the staff, moving silently through the corridors toward the West Wing. She had explored the locked room with the photos, but that had been a curated shrine. She needed the truth, the messy, ugly truth that men like Damien Moretti kept hidden in drawers and safes. She found his private study at the end of the hall. The door was heavy oak, unlocked. Damien was arrogant. He assumed his authority was enough to keep people out. The room was dark, smelling of leather and tobacco. A massive mahogany desk dominated the space. Emily moved behind it, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She opened the drawers one by one. Legal documents, property deeds, bank statements with numbers so high they made her dizzy. Then she found the false bottom in the third drawer. It was a simple mechanism, a small latch hidden under the velvet lining. It clicked open, revealing a thick manila folder. There was no name on it, just a date. 6 months ago. Emily opened it. Photographs spilled out across the desktop. They were not the posed, romantic photos from the locked room. These were grainy. They were taken from a distance, through telephoto lenses, or from the interiors of parked cars. There was a woman, but not the her she was now. This woman looked tired. She was wearing a faded denim jacket and black non-slip shoes. She was walking out of a diner called Sal's Place, counting a wad of crumpled bills. Another photo, her waiting at a bus stop in the rain, looking miserable. Another, her walking into a small, run-down apartment building, carrying grocery bags. There were notes scribbled in the margins of the surveillance logs. 8 o'clock. Arrived at shift. 16:30. Left work. No contacts, alone. And then, chillingly, there were photos of her through her apartment window. Just a silhouette moving behind curtains. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, suppressing a scream. This wasn't a marriage. This was a hunt. I told myself I would burn those. The voice came from the doorway, low and calm, but laced with a terrifying resignation. Emily spun around, the folder slipping from her hands and scattering the photos across the floor. Damien was standing there. He hadn't left, or he had come back. He stood on the threshold, filling the space, his dark suit absorbing the light. "You lied," Emily whispered. The fear was there, cold and sharp, but the anger was rising to meet it, hot and blinding. "Everything. You lied about everything." Damien walked into the room. He didn't look at the photos. He looked only at her. "I gave you a life," he said, his voice devoid of apology. "I gave you safety." "You gave me a cage," she screamed, the sound tearing at her throat. She pointed a shaking finger at the photos on the floor. "I wasn't your wife. I was a waitress. I was a stranger you were stalking." Damien's jaw tightened. He stopped on the other side of the desk, placing his hands on the wood. "Not a stranger. Never a stranger? I knew you better than you knew yourself. I watched you for months. Emily. I watched you struggle to pay rent for that shoebox apartment. I watched men look at you with hungry eyes and do nothing to help you. I watched you work yourself to the bone for pennies. So you decided to steal me?" she demanded, backing away until her spine hit the bookshelves. "I decided to save you," he corrected, his voice dropping an octave. "I was obsessed. I admit that. I saw you once, serving coffee to one of my lieutenants, and I couldn't look away. You were so pure, untouched by this filth I live in. I wanted you, and I always get what I want." "You're a monster," she breathed. "Maybe," Damien allowed, "but I never meant for this to happen. The crash. That wasn't part of the plan." He rounded the desk, moving slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal. "I was coming to you that night, not to kidnap you, to warn you. My enemies, the Veranos, they had seen me watching you. They knew you were my weakness before I had even spoken a word to you. They put a hit out on you to get to me." He stopped 3 feet from her. "I was racing to get to you before they did. You got in your car. You were scared. You drove too fast. I saw the crash happen in my rearview mirror." His voice cracked, a fissure of raw pain showing through the monster's mask. "I pulled you out of that wreck. You were bleeding. You didn't know your own name. So, yes, I lied. I told the doctors you were mine because it was the only way to take you somewhere they couldn't finish the job." Emily stared at him, her chest heaving. The information was too much to process. Stalker, savior, target, wife. "I don't believe you," she choked out. "I want to leave. Now." "You can't," Damien said simply. "Watch me." She bolted. She didn't think. She just moved. She dodged past him, sprinting out of the study and down the hallway. She heard him shout her name. "Emily, wait!" But she didn't stop. She took the stairs 2 at a time, stumbling, catching herself on the railing, and ignoring the shooting pain in her healing ribs. She hit the foyer running. The heavy oak front doors were ahead. She threw her weight against the latch, wrenching the door open. Cold, damp air hit her face. The night was dark, the driveway illuminated by the harsh yellow glare of floodlights. She made it 3 steps onto the gravel before a wall of muscle blocked her path. 2 guards had stepped out of the shadows, their faces impassive. They didn't grab her roughly, but they formed an impenetrable barrier. "Move!" she screamed, shoving at the chest of the nearest man. It was like shoving a boulder. "Let me go! Stand down!" Damien's voice cut through the night air like a whip. He was standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the light of the hall. The guards hesitated, looking from her to him. "I said stand down," Damien repeated, stepping out onto the porch. "If she wants to leave, let her leave." The guard stepped aside instantly. The path to the main gate was open. Emily froze. She looked at the open driveway, leading down into the black woods and eventually to the main road miles away. Freedom? She looked back at Damien. He stood on the steps, his hands in his pockets, looking utterly defeated. "Go," he said softly. "Walk out that gate. You have no money, you have no phone. You have no memory of where you live or who your friends are, and somewhere out there, in the dark, there are men who know your face. Men who cut the brake lines on your car 3 weeks ago. They will find you. And this time, I won't be there to pull you out of the fire." It wasn't a threat. That was the worst part. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the cold precision of a man who knew the cruelty of the world intimately. Emily looked at the darkness beyond the gates. The wind howled through the trees, sounding like a chorus of warning whispers. She realized with a sickening jolt that he was right. She was a ghost. If she walked out there, she would disappear. She shivered, the adrenaline crashing out of her system, leaving her trembling and cold. Damien walked down the steps. He stopped in front of her, taking off his suit jacket and draping it over her shoulders. The warmth of it was heavy, smelling of him. "I am a liar, Emily," he whispered, looking down at her. "I am a criminal. I am a selfish, violent man, but I am the only thing standing between you and a grave." She didn't fight him when he turned her around and guided her back inside. She walked like a prisoner, not of the house, but of her own helplessness. Sleep was a battlefield that night. Emily lay in the center of the massive bed, staring at the ceiling shadows. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photos, the woman in the diner, the woman counting tips, the woman who was free. Even if she was struggling, eventually, exhaustion won, dragging her under. But the dream was waiting. She was in a car, a small, beat-up sedan that smelled of pine air freshener. It was raining. The wipers were slapping frantically against the glass. She was crying, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. She saw headlights in the rearview mirror, blinding, too close. She pressed her foot down on the brake pedal. It went to the floor. There was no resistance. Nothing. The car picked up speed, hydroplaning on the slick asphalt. "No!" she screamed in the dream. She pumped the pedal. "No, no, no!" She saw the guardrail rushing toward her. She saw the drop beyond it. She heard the screech of metal, the shattering of glass, the crunch of the frame collapsing around her body. "No!" Emily woke up screaming. She was sitting bolt upright in bed, her body drenched in cold sweat, her throat raw. The scream was still echoing in the room. The door burst open. Damien was there in seconds. He didn't look like the composed Mafia Don. He was barefoot, wearing only sweatpants, his chest bare, his hair messy. He had a gun in his hand, scanning the room for a threat before realizing the threat was inside her head. He safetied the weapon and tossed it onto the armchair, rushing to the bed. "Emily," he gasped, reaching for her. "I'm here. It's okay. Don't touch me," she shrieked, scrambling backward against the headboard, pulling her knees to her chest. "You did this. This is your fault." She was hysterical, the terror of the dream blending with the horror of her reality. "You watched me. You let them find me. You ruined my life." She grabbed a pillow and threw it at him. It hit him in the chest and fell harmlessly to the floor. She grabbed a heavy crystal water glass from the nightstand and hurled it. It shattered against the wall inches from his head, raining glass shards onto the carpet. Damien didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He didn't shout back. He did the one thing she didn't expect. He dropped to his knees, right there, by the side of the bed, amidst the broken glass. The most powerful man in the city lowered himself to the floor. He bowed his head, his hands resting open on his thighs, palms up in surrender. "Yes," he said. His voice was rough, broken. "Yes, it is my fault. All of it. I brought the darkness to your door." Emily stopped, her chest heaving, her sobs catching in her throat. To see him like this, stripped of his armor, kneeling in penitence, broke something inside her. He looked up at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with a raw, agonizing worship. "I was wrong to bring you into my world," he rasped. "I was arrogant. I thought I could own you without breaking you. But I promise you this, Emily. I would burn the world to ash if it meant keeping you safe. I would tear this city down brick by brick before I let them touch you again." He reached out a hand, slowly, fingers trembling slightly. "Hate me. Please hate me, but let me protect you." Emily looked at him. She saw the monster he was. She saw the obsession, but she also saw the terrifying depth of his devotion. In a world where someone had cut her brakes to kill her, this man was offering to be her shield. She was trembling, the cold terror of the nightmare still clinging to her skin. She needed warmth. She needed an anchor. Slowly, hesitantly, she uncurled her legs. She reached out and took his hand. Damien let out a shuddering breath, like a man spared from execution. He rose from his knees and sat on the edge of the bed, pulling her into his arms. He didn't try to kiss her. He just held her. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He held her so tightly it almost hurt, as if he was trying to physically hold her shattered pieces together. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair, rocking her slightly. "I've got you." Emily closed her eyes, letting the tears fall onto his bare shoulder. She hated him. She feared him. But as the thunder rolled in the distance and the shadows of the room pressed in, she buried her hands in his hair and held on for dear life. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet drapes, casting long, dust-mote-filled beams across the carpet. Emily sat in the high-backed leather chair in Damien's study, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was not wearing the silk pajamas of a pampered wife anymore. She was dressed in jeans and a sweater Damien had ordered for her, clothes that felt more like Emma Collins than Mrs. Moretti. Damien stood by the window, his back to her, watching the grounds. He looked tired, the tension in his shoulders visible even through his shirt. "I will stay," Emily said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "but not as your prisoner, and not as a lie. If I am going to survive this, I need to know exactly what I am surviving." Damien turned slowly. The relief in his eyes was profound, but he kept his distance, respecting the line she had drawn in the sand the night before. "The Veranos," he said, the name leaving his mouth like a curse. "They are a rival family, old blood, old money, and they are losing territory to me. They were looking for a weakness, a crack in the armor. I never had one. I have no parents, no siblings, no lovers. I made sure of that." He walked over to the desk and leaned against it, crossing his ankles. "Then I saw you. It was nothing at first, just a waitress at a diner near the docks. But I kept coming back. I sat in the corner booth. I watched you laugh with customers. I watched you sneak stray cat food by the back door. You were light. And in my world, light is dangerous because it draws attention. So they saw you watching me," Emily concluded, a chill running down her spine. "Yes, Vince Verano put two and two together. He knew that if he hurt you, it would break me. He didn't want to ransom you. Emily, he wanted to kill you just to watch me bleed. Emma, she corrected him softly. My name is Emma Collins. Damien flinched slightly, then nodded. Emma Collins. You grew up in Ohio. You moved here 3 years ago to study art, but you dropped out when your mother got sick. You worked double shifts to pay her medical bills until she passed. You have a cat named Barnaby who ran away last winter. You like your coffee black, and you are allergic to strawberries. Hearing her life recited back to her by the man who had stolen it was disorienting. It was a violation, yet it was also the first time she felt real since waking up in the hospital. I want to learn, she said. Standing up, Damien frowned. Learn what? How to stop being a victim. If people are coming to kill me, I want to know how to kill them first. The shooting range was located in the basement of the estate, a soundproofed concrete tunnel that smelled of sulfur and cold steel. Damien stood behind her, his chest pressing lightly against her back, his arms bracketing hers as he corrected her stance. The intimacy of it was suffocating and intoxicating all at once. Widen your stance, he murmured, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. You need a solid foundation. If you are off balance, the recoil will knock you over. Emily adjusted her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could feel the heat radiating from him. Every time his hands adjusted her grip on the pistol, fingers brushing her wrist, her forearm, her waist, a jolt of electricity shot through her. It was confusing. She should be repulsed by him. He was the reason she was in danger. But her body didn't care about logic. Her body remembered the way he had held her through the nightmare. Relax your shoulders, Damien instructed. His hand moved to her shoulder, squeezing gently to release the tension. Breathe. Squeeze the trigger between heartbeats. Emily took a deep breath, focused on the paper target down the lane, and pulled the trigger. The gun bucked in her hand, the loud crack echoing in the small space. The bullet hit the outer ring of the target. Good, Damien said, his voice low and praising. Again. They spent hours down there over the next week. It became their ritual. In the silence of the range, the lies fell away. There was only the weight of the gun, the smell of gunpowder, and the undeniable magnetic pull between them. They moved around each other like planets in orbit, drawn together by gravity but terrified of the collision. One evening, after a grueling session where Emily had finally hit the bullseye 3 times in a row, they retreated to the kitchen for a late dinner. The staff had left roast chicken and roasted vegetables, but they ate at the island, dispensing with the formality of the dining room. Damien poured them both a second glass of heavy, dark red wine. The adrenaline from the shooting range was still buzzing in Emily's veins, mixed now with the alcohol and the low, warm light of the kitchen. She looked at him. He had discarded his jacket, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms scarred from past violence. He was looking at her with that same intensity he always had, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Do you ever regret it? She asked suddenly. Coming for me that night? Damien set his glass down. Every day, he admitted. I regret that you are in danger. I regret that you lost your memories. I regret that I had to lie to you. He paused, his eyes darkening. But if I had not come, you would be dead. And a world without you in it is not a world I want to live in. The raw honesty of it took her breath away. Emily didn't think. She slid off her stool and stepped into the space between his knees. Damien went still, his hands gripping the edge of the marble counter until his knuckles turned white. Emma, he warned, his voice a rough growl. She ignored him. She reached up, tangling her fingers in the hair at the nape of his neck, and pulled his face down to hers. She kissed him. It wasn't like the kiss in the hallway, which had been stolen and desperate. This was a choice. She kissed him with a mixture of anger, fear, and a desire that had been building since she woke up in that hospital bed. Damien hesitated for a fraction of a second, his body rigid. Then he broke. He made a low noise in his throat and surged forward, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He kissed her back fiercely, devouring her. His mouth was hot, demanding, tasting of wine and desperation. Emily gasped against his lips as his hands roamed over her back, pressing her closer, as if he could merge their bodies into one. She felt safe and terrified all at once. Her hands explored the muscles of his shoulders, the sharp line of his jaw. He lifted her easily, setting her on the edge of the counter without breaking the kiss. His hands moved to her thighs, his thumbs tracing the denim of her jeans. The friction was electric. Breathless moans escaped them, swallowed by the other's mouth. "Damien," she whispered, pulling back just an inch to breathe. Her eyes were wide, her pupils blown. He leaned his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. His hand moved up her side, his thumb brushing the underside of her breast. Emily froze. The reality of it crashed down on her. This was the man who had stalked her. This was a mafia boss. She didn't know him. Not really. She pulled back sharply, her hands pushing against his chest. "I can't," she gasped, sliding off the counter and stumbling back. "I can't. I'm sorry." Damien stopped immediately. He didn't chase her. He didn't try to coax her back. He stood by the counter, his chest heaving, his hands held up in surrender. "It is okay," he said, his voice strained but gentle. He ran a hand through his hair, composing himself. "You do not have to apologize." He looked at her, his eyes burning with a mixture of desire and infinite patience. "I told you, Emma, I will wait. Not until you want everything, not until you trust me completely." The peace shattered 3 hours later. Emily was in her room, still awake, staring at the ceiling and replaying the kiss in her mind. When the alarm blared, it wasn't a siren, it was a low, rhythmic pulse that vibrated through the floorboards. Then came the sound of automatic gunfire. It was loud, terrifyingly close. Glass shattered somewhere downstairs. Her door flew open. Emily screamed, scrambling back, but it was Damien. He was fully dressed in tactical gear, a vest over his chest, an assault rifle in his hands. His face was a mask of cold, lethal focus. "Come with me," he commanded. "Now." He grabbed her hand and ran. They didn't go to the stairs. He pulled her into his bedroom, to the walk-in closet. He shoved a section of shelving aside, revealing a steel door. "Get in," he said, punching a code into the keypad. The door hissed open. "Where are you going?" Emily cried, grabbing his arm. "Don't leave me." "I have to buy them time," Damien said, his eyes wild. "The panic room is self-contained. Oxygen, water, cameras. Do not open this door for anyone but me. Do you understand? Anyone but me. Damien, love you," he said. It was a goodbye. He shoved her inside and hit the button. The heavy steel door slid shut, sealing with a thud that cut off the sound of the chaos outside. Emily was plunged into silence. A small monitor on the wall flickered to life, showing grainy black and white feeds of the house. She watched in horror. Men in masks were swarming the foyer. She saw Damien's guards engaging them. Flashes of muzzle fire lit up the screen like strobe lights. Bodies fell. Furniture disintegrated under the hail of bullets. She saw Damien. He moved like a demon, efficient and brutal. He took cover behind a marble pillar, firing with precision. He was drawing them away from the stairs, away from her. She sat on the floor of the small metal room, her knees pulled to her chest, rocking back and forth. She couldn't look away. She watched as the Verano hitmen pushed forward. She watched Damien run out of ammo and switch to a handgun. Retreating down a hallway, then the camera feed is cut to static. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She sat there for what felt like eternity. The silence of the panic room was deafening. She didn't know if 5 minutes had passed or 5 hours. She didn't know if she was a widow. Finally, the keypad on the inside of the door beeped. Emily scrambled back, grabbing a heavy flashlight from the emergency shelf, raising it like a club. The door hissed open. Damien stood there. He was a wreck. His tactical vest was shredded. Blood was streaming down his left arm, soaking his sleeve. There was a gash on his forehead that was bleeding freely, masking half his face in red. He was breathing hard, leaning against the doorframe to stay upright. "It is over," he rasped. Emily dropped the flashlight. She didn't think about the lies. She didn't think about the stalking. She ran to him. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his ruined shirt. "You're alive!" she sobbed. "You're alive!" Damien groaned in pain but wrapped his good arm around her, holding her tight. "I told you," he whispered against her hair. "I would burn the world." She pulled back, her hands hovering over his injuries. "You're bleeding. We need a doctor." "Doctor, Aris is on his way," Damien said, grimacing as he shifted his weight. "But I need to sit down." She helped him to the bedroom. The main house was a war zone, but the bedroom was untouched. She guided him to the edge of the bed and ran to the bathroom, grabbing the first aid kit. Her hands shook as she cut away his sleeve. The bullet had grazed his bicep, a deep furrow, but it hadn't hit the bone. She cleaned it with antiseptic. Ignoring his sharp intake of breath, she bandaged it tightly. Her movements efficient, driven by adrenaline and love. Yes, love. She couldn't deny it anymore. It was a twisted, dangerous, dark thing, but it was love. When she finished taping the bandage, she looked up. Damien was watching her. The adrenaline was fading from his eyes, leaving behind a raw vulnerability. He looked at her like she was a miracle. "You stayed," he said softly. "You could have run when the power cut. The gates were open. I wasn't leaving without you," she said. She stood between his legs as he sat on the edge of the bed. She reached out and cupped his face. Avoiding the cut on his forehead, she used her thumb to wipe away a smear of blood on his cheek. "Damien," she whispered. She leaned in. This time, there was no hesitation. There was no wine-fueled impulse. She kissed him slowly and deeply. It was a kiss of claim. It was a kiss that said, "I see you. I see the blood and the violence and the lies, and I am still here." Damien let out a shuddering sigh, his forehead resting against hers when they broke apart. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "Probably not," she agreed softly, "but you have me." He didn't try to take it further. He was exhausted, bleeding, and the adrenaline crash was hitting him hard. He simply lifted his legs onto the bed and pulled her down with him. He didn't let go of her. He lay on his back, his good arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her into his side. Emily rested her head on his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. Outside, sirens were finally wailing in the distance. The police, or Damien's cleanup crew, were arriving. The world was coming back to intrude on them. But in the dark of the bedroom, with the scent of copper and antiseptic in the air, Damien pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I will never let you go again," he whispered into the darkness. "Never." And for the first time, Emily didn't want him to. The memories did not return like a tide. They returned like shrapnel. For days, Emily had been living in a fog of healing bruises and whispered secrets. But as the swelling in her brain subsided, the barrier damming her past began to crack. It started with small things. The smell of yeast rising in the kitchen downstairs triggered a sudden, vivid image of a small storefront with a striped awning, Emma's Bakery, a dream written on a napkin in a diner at 3 a.m. Then came the heavier things. Her name, Emma Collins, a name that tasted of cheap coffee, long shifts, and the quiet pride of survival. She remembered the ache in her feet after a double shift. She remembered the loneliness of her small apartment, the way the radiator clanked in the winter. But with the light came the shadow. She was sitting in the library, staring at the rain lashing against the window, when a flash of lightning illuminated the room. In that split second of stark white light, a face superimposed itself over the reflection in the glass. It was not Damien. It was a man with a narrow, fox-like face and eyes that looked like flat, dead coins. She remembered him sitting in her section at the diner. He never ordered much, just coffee, but he stayed for hours. He never looked at the menu. He watched her. He watched her hands as she poured the coffee. He watched her walk to the kitchen. She remembered the night of the accident, the rain, the headlights in her rearview mirror, and that face, illuminated by the dashboard light of the car that had run her off the road before she even hit the guardrail. "Vince," she whispered into the empty room. The name was a curse she hadn't known she knew. "Vince Verano, When Damien walked in, moments later, carrying a tray of tea, she didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the window. "You know who cut my brakes," she said. It wasn't a question. Damien set the tray down slowly. The clinking of china sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Yes, it was him. The man with the pale eyes, Vince. "He is the underboss of the Verano family," Damien confirmed, his voice low and dangerous. "He has been trying to provoke a war for years, killing you. It was supposed to be his opening move. Is he still out there? He is in hiding, but yes, he is alive." Emily turned to face him. The fear that had paralyzed her for weeks was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that felt entirely new. This was not the terrified amnesiac in the hospital bed. This was Emma Collins, who had fought for every scrap of peace she had ever owned. "I want him caught," she said. "My men are turning the city upside down," Damien promised, stepping toward her. "We will find him." "No," Emily shook her head. "He's hiding from you. He knows your tactics. He knows your soldiers. But he doesn't know me. He thinks I am dead, or he thinks I am a helpless invalid locked away in your tower." She took a breath, steeling herself. "Use me." Damien stopped dead. His expression darkened, shifting from concern to fury instantly. "No, he is obsessed with hurting you through me," Emily argued, her voice rising. "If he sees me, publicly, vulnerable, away from your fortress, he won't be able to resist. He will come to finish the job." "Absolutely not," Damien snarled. He looked terrified, a crack in his composure that she had rarely seen. "I almost lost you once. Do you think I will dangle you like bait in front of a shark?" "I am the only bait he will bite," she shouted back. She crossed the room and grabbed his lapels, forcing him to look at her. "I am tired of hiding. Damien, I am tired of being a ghost in your house. If we don't end this, he will keep coming. He will wait until we are careless. I want my life back. I want us to have a life." The word "us" hung in the air. It was the first time she had claimed him, truly claimed him, since her memory returned. Damien stared down at her, his hands trembling where they hovered over her waist, terrified to touch her, terrified to let her go. He searched her eyes for any sign of hesitation. He found none. "If anything happens to you," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I will not survive it. Do you understand? There is no version of this world where I live if you die." "Then don't let me die," she said fiercely. "Give me a weapon and be ready." The trap was set for noon on a Tuesday. The location was a high-end cafe in the city center, a place with floor-to-ceiling glass windows, visible, public, seemingly safe. It was the kind of place Mrs. Moretti would lunch. Emily sat at a small round table near the back, nursing a cappuccino she couldn't swallow. She was wearing a cream-colored trench coat and dark sunglasses, her hair styled in loose waves. She looked like money. She looked like a target, under the table. Her hand rested on her thigh. Strapped there, beneath the fabric of her dress, was a ceramic blade. It was thin, sharp, and easily concealed. Damien had spent the last 24 hours teaching her how to draw it, where to strike, the femoral artery, he had told her. His face gray with nausea as he demonstrated, inner thigh. If you have to use it, you drive it deep and you twist. She checked her phone. It was a burner, untraceable. One text drafted now. The cafe was buzzing with lunch traffic, businessmen in suits, women with shopping bags, but Emily felt the eyes before she saw him. The bell above the door chimed. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vince Verano walked in. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a wealthy man in a designer suit, but Emily saw the predator in his gait. He scanned the room, his gaze sliding over faces until it locked onto her. A slow, oily smile spread across his face. He didn't look surprised. He looked delighted. He walked straight to her table. He didn't wait for an invitation. He pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down. "Mrs. Moretti," Vince said, his voice smooth and slick like spilled oil. "Or is it Emma? I never know which name you prefer these days." Emily's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she forced her hand to remain steady as she lifted her cup. "Do I know you? "Oh, I think you do." Vince grinned, leaning forward. "I think you remember the headlights. I think you remember the sound of metal screaming." He tapped his fingers on the table. "You are a hard woman to kill, Emma. I respect that. Most things I break stay broken." "My husband will be here any minute," Emily said coldly. "Your husband is chasing a decoy across town." Vince laughed. "I sent a very credible tip about my location to the docks. He's probably kicking down warehouse doors right now." He reached across the table and grabbed her wrist. His grip was bruising, iron hard. "You made a mistake coming out into the light. Little mouse. Damien can't protect you here." Emily looked at his hand on her wrist. She looked at the confidence in his eyes. She moved her other hand under the table and pressed send. "He isn't at the docks," Emily said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Vince frowned. "What?" The front window of the cafe exploded. It wasn't a gunshot, it was a body. Damien Moretti came through the shattered glass like a force of nature. He didn't use the door. He didn't care about the screaming patrons or the flying shards. He was a blur of violence and rage. "Vince!" Damien roared, the sound animalistic. Vince moved fast. He yanked Emily out of her chair, spinning her around and hauling her against his chest. He produced a gun from his jacket in a blur of motion, pressing the cold barrel against her temple. "Stop!" Vince screamed. "One step and I paint the wall with her." Damien skidded to a halt 5 feet away. He was breathing hard, glass dust shimmering in his dark hair. His gun raised and leveled at Vince's head, but he couldn't take the shot. Vince was using Emily as a human shield, his body completely hidden behind hers. The cafe had gone silent, save for the whimpering of customers cowering under tables. "Drop it, Moretti!" Vince yelled, his arm tightening around Emily's throat, cutting off her air. "Drop the gun or she dies right now!" Damien's eyes were wild, locked onto Emily's. She saw the agony in them. She saw a man who was watching his entire world balance on the edge of a knife. Slowly, agonizingly, Damien lowered his weapon. He placed it on the floor and kicked it away. "Let her go, Vince!" Damien begged. It was a sound Emily had never heard. A king begging. "Take me. You want me. Let her walk out of here, and I am yours." "I am going to kill you," Vince hissed, dragging Emily backward toward the rear exit. "But first, I am going to make you watch while I finish what the car accident started. I am going to take her apart piece by piece." Emily felt the vibration of his laughter against her back. She felt his arrogance. He thought he had won. He had the gun. He had the girl. He had the rival boss on his knees. He had forgotten about the mouse. Emily's right hand drifted down to her thigh. She found the slit in her dress. Her fingers closed around the hilt of the ceramic blade, inner thigh. Drive it deep. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think so. She acted. With a guttural scream of effort, she drove the blade backward and down, burying it into Vince's leg just above the knee. Vince howled, a sound of pure shock and pain. His grip on her throat loosened for a fraction of a second. His leg buckled. That was all Damien needed. Before Vince could recover. Damien had drawn a backup piece from his ankle holster. The motion was so fast it was a blur. Bang. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Vince jerked backward, a neat hole appearing in the center of his forehead. He collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut, the gun clattering from his hand. Emily stood there, gasping for air, staring at the body. Damien was on her in an instant. He didn't check the body. He didn't look at the crowd. He grabbed her face in his hands, frantically checking her for injuries. "Emily!" he choked out, his hands shaking as they smoothed over her hair, her face, her arms. "Emily, look at me! Are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" "I got him," she whispered, shock making her voice sound far away. "I got him! You did!" Damien breathed, pulling her into his chest, crushing her against him. "You did! You are safe! I have you!" Then the sirens began. Within minutes, the street outside was a sea of flashing red and blue lights. Uniformed officers stormed the cafe, guns drawn. But worse than the police were the cameras. The press had arrived. As Damien tried to shield her, guiding her out the side exit, the flashes began. Hundreds of them, blinding white bursts of light. "Mr. Moretti, Mr. Moretti." "Is that her?" Is that the missing wife? Look this way! Emily buried her face in Damien's coat, but it was too late. The image was captured, the woman in the cream trench coat, blood on her hands, clinging to the city's most notorious crime lord. Emma Collins was dead. Mrs. Moretti was headline news. The safe house was an hour north of the city, a modern glass box hidden deep in the woods, overlooking a gray, churning lake. It was quiet here. No sirens, no cameras, just the sound of rain on the roof. Damien had dismissed the guards to the perimeter. He locked the doors. He shut the blinds. Emily sat in the massive stone bathtub, the water hot and steaming, smelling of lavender oil Damien had found in the cabinet. She was scrubbing her skin. She scrubbed until it was red, trying to wash off the feeling of Vince's hand on her wrist, the feeling of the blades sinking into flesh. She was shaking. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving behind a hollow, rattling cold that the hot water couldn't touch. The door opened. Damien walked in. He had discarded his ruined jacket and gun, but he was still wearing his dress shirt and trousers. He looked exhausted, his eyes haunted. He saw her shaking. He saw the raw red marks on her arms where she had been scrubbing. He didn't say a word. He didn't undress. He simply walked over to the tub and stepped in. Shoes, trousers, shirt and all. He sat down behind her, the water rising to soak his clothes, ruining the expensive fabric instantly. He pulled her back against his chest. "Damien," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Your clothes." "Doesn't matter," he murmured. He wrapped his arms around her, crossing them over her chest, holding her tight. The weight of his soaked clothes, the heat of his body, the solidity of him, it was an anchor. He rested his chin on her wet shoulder. They sat there in silence for a long time. The water turned from hot to warm. The shaking in Emily's limbs slowly subsided, replaced by the steady rhythm of Damien's breathing against her back. "I saw you," she whispered into the stream. "When he had the gun to my head, you dropped yours. You were going to let him kill you." "Yes," Damien said simply. "Why?" "Because I can live with dying," he said, his voice vibrating against her spine. "I cannot live with you dying." She turned in his arms, the water sloshing gently. She faced him. His white shirt was translucent now, clinging to his skin, revealing the dark tattoos beneath. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He looked stripped bare, vulnerable in a way the world never saw him. She looked at his lips. She remembered the lie. She remembered the stalking. She remembered the protection. She remembered the way he had looked at her in the diner, months ago, when she was nobody. "I remember," she said softly. Damien stiffened. He searched her eyes, waiting for the accusation, waiting for her to tell him to leave. "You remember the accident?" "I remember everything," she corrected. "I remember my apartment. I remember my mother's face. I remember being Emma Collins." She reached up, her wet hand cupping his cheek. "And I remember you. I remember the man who sat in booth 4 and drank terrible coffee just to be near me. I remember the man who knelt on the floor of my bedroom and begged for my forgiveness. I remember the man who stepped into the line of fire for me today." Damien closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "Emma. I am Emma," she agreed, "but I am also the woman who fell in love with you in the dark." She leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't a clash of teeth and desperation. It was slow. It was a question and an answer. Damien made a low, broken sound and kissed her back. His hands, wet and heavy, moved to her waist, pulling her flush against him in the water. They moved from the bath to the bedroom in a haze of dripping water and discarded clothes. The sheets were cool against her heated skin. When they finally made love, it was a revelation. There was no rush. Damien worshipped her. He touched her as if she were made of spun glass, as if he were terrified she would shatter, yet desperate to be close enough to keep her whole. Every touch was an apology. Every kiss was a vow. He moved over her, his eyes locked on hers, open and vulnerable. There was fear there, fear that this was a dream, fear that she would change her mind. "I'm here," she whispered, arching into him, her hands gripping his shoulders. "I'm right here." Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes, hot and salty, mixing with the dampness of her hair. They were tears of relief, of release, of mourning for the girl she had been and the woman she had been forced to become. Damien kissed them away. He murmured her name, Emma, 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 like a prayer against her skin. When the crest came, it was a shuddering, earth-shattering release that left them both clinging to each other, breathless and tangled in the sheets. Afterward, the silence in the room was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive. It was the silence of a storm that had finally broken. Damien lay on his side, watching her. He traced the line of her jaw with his finger. "I remember everything now," she whispered again, her voice thick with sleep and emotion. "The lies, the danger, who you are." She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. "But I still want you." Damien let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for months. He pulled her into his arms, tucking her head under his chin, holding her as the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the blinds. "Then you have me," he vowed into the quiet room, body and soul, forever. The room was small, windowless, and smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. A single camera lens stared unblinkingly from the far wall, its red recording light a steady, burning eye. Emily sat at the metal table, her hands clasped together to stop them from shaking. She was not wearing the expensive silks of Mrs. Moretti today, nor the waitress uniform of Emma Collins. She wore a simple gray blazer and trousers, armor for a different kind of battlefield. "State your name for the record," the federal prosecutor said, his voice distorted slightly by the speaker system. He was in another room, perhaps even another city. This was a ghost testimony, arranged through back channels Damien had leveraged his entire fortune to secure. "Emma Collins," she said, her voice clear. She paused, then added, "also known as Emily Moretti." For the next 4 hours, she dismantled an empire, with Vince Verano dead. The head of the snake was gone, but the body was still thrashing. Emily gave them everything. She described the stalking. She described the hit on her life. She described the kidnapping attempt at the cafe. She confirmed the identities of the lieutenants who had aided Vince, men whose faces she had memorized from the files Damien had shown her. She did not implicate Damien. That was the deal. She gave them the Veranos on a silver platter. And in exchange, the file on Damien Moretti's involvement in the dock shootouts was lost in a tragic server error. When it was over, the recording light blinked off. Damien was waiting for her in the hallway. He leaned against the wall, wearing a baseball cap low over his eyes and a jacket that was 2 sizes too big, camouflage for a man who used to wear custom Italian suits like a second skin. When he didn't say a word, he just offered her his hand. She took it. His grip was warm, solid and familiar. It was the only thing in the world that felt permanent. "Is it done?" he asked quietly as they walked toward the service exit, away from the prying eyes of the press who were still camped out at the front of the courthouse. "It is done," Emily breathed, the weight of the last few months lifting slightly from her shoulders. "They have enough to bury the rest of the syndicate for 20 years. "Good," Damien said. He pushed open the heavy steel door, revealing a nondescript sedan waiting in the alleyway. "Then we disappear." The farmhouse was 300 miles away, tucked into the rolling valleys of a state where the winters were hard and the neighbors kept to themselves. It was an old structure, its white paint peeling slightly, with a wraparound porch that groaned under the weight of the wind. It was nothing like the fortress of stone and glass they had left behind. There were no marble floors, no chandeliers, no panic rooms hidden behind bookshelves. Here, they were Jack and Sarah. The adjustment was jarring. For the first month, Emily jumped every time a floorboard creaked. She slept with a kitchen knife under her pillow until Damien gently replaced it with a heavy flashlight, telling her it was more practical. But slowly, the rhythm of the land began to seep into their bones. Damien, the man who had once commanded an army of soldiers, now waged war on weeds and rocky soil. He spent his days outside, stripping off his shirt to toil under the sun, repairing the sagging fence line, chopping wood for the stove, and planting a vegetable garden that he tended with the same obsessive focus he had once applied to his business. Emily watched him from the kitchen window as she kneaded dough. Her hands, once blistered from carrying trays, found a new memory in the flour and yeast. She baked bread, pies, and tarts, the scents filling the drafty house with warmth. One afternoon, she walked out to the garden with a glass of lemonade. Damien was on his knees in the dirt, carefully tying a tomato plant to a stake. He looked up as she approached, wiping sweat from his brow with his forearm. There was dirt on his cheek, and his hands were rough, stained green from the leaves. He looked younger. The sharp, predatory edge was still there in his eyes. He still scanned the tree line every few minutes, but the heavy burden of leadership was gone. "You have a green thumb," she teased, handing him the glass. Damien took a long drink, his throat working. "It is just logistics," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Soil, water, sun, it makes more sense than people. Plants do not lie." Emily sat on the grass beside him, tucking her skirt around her legs. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. "The power, the city?" Damien looked at the horizon, where the sun was dipping below the hills. "I miss the noise sometimes, the certainty of it. But then I look at you." He turned his gaze to her, intense and unwavering. "I look at you standing on this porch, not looking over your shoulder, and I remember that I have everything I ever wanted right here." He reached out, his dirty hand hovering near her face before he pulled it back, mindful of the soil. Emily leaned forward and kissed his cheek, not caring about the dirt. "I like Jack," she whispered. "He is a good man." "He's trying to be," Damien murmured. "But the past is a stubborn ghost. It doesn't vanish just because you change your name." Guilt lingered in the quiet moments. Emily would wake up at night and find Damien sitting in the rocking chair by the window, a shotgun across his lap, staring into the dark. He was doing penance for the violence he had brought into her life, and Emily carried her own weight, the memory of the blade sinking into Vince's leg, the realization that she was capable of violence too. Then, the world shifted again. It was late autumn. The trees were turning to fire and gold. Emily had been feeling off for a week, tired, nauseous at the smell of coffee. She chalked it up to the changing season until the morning she fainted in the kitchen. Damien had found her, terrified, and driven her to the small-town clinic an hour away, speeding the whole time. When the doctor came back with the results, the silence in the room was deafening, pregnant. The drive back to the farmhouse was silent. Damien gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. Emily stared out the window, her hand resting flat on her stomach. She was terrified. How could she bring a child into this? They were runaways. They were hiding from a blood feud that might never truly end. What if they were found? What if her child inherited Damien's enemies, or worse, his darkness? When they got home, Damien didn't go inside. He walked straight to the woodpile and started chopping. The sound of the axe splitting wood echoed like gunshots across the valley. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Emily watched him for a long time before walking out. The air was crisp, biting. "Damien," she said. He stopped. The axe buried deep in a log. He didn't turn around. His shoulders were heaving. "We can't do this," he rasped, his voice ragged. "Look at us, Emily. We are living on borrowed time. To bring a life into this, to bring an innocent thing into my mess, it is selfish." "It's a baby," Emily said, her voice trembling but firm. "It's not a mess. It's a baby." Damien turned then. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed with panic. "I am a killer," he whispered. "I have blood on my hands that will never wash off. What kind of father can I be? What if I fail? What if I can't protect them like I couldn't protect you?" Emily stepped over the scattered wood chips. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You are the man who burned the world to keep me safe," she said fiercely. "You are the man who is planting a garden in the middle of nowhere just to give me peace. You are not just a killer. Damien, you are a survivor." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. The warmth of his palm seeped through her sweater. This child will not know the darkness, she vowed. We will be the wall that keeps it out. Damien stared at his hand on her stomach. He crumbled. The tension left his body and he fell to his knees in the dirt, pressing his forehead against her waist. He wrapped his arms around her hips, holding on to her and the tiny, unseen life inside her. I promise, he choked out, his voice muffled by her clothes. I promise you, Emma. This child will have everything we never did. They will have safety. They will have peace. They will never know the sound of a gunshot. Fate, however, has a cruel sense of irony. 2 weeks later, the threat arrived. It was not an army. It was not a tactical team. It was one man, a Verano loyalist, a cousin of Vince's named Marco who had slipped through the FBI's net. He had spent months tracking the ghost of Damien Moretti, following a trail of shell corporations and burner phones that eventually led to a small hardware store purchase in a rural valley. He came at dusk, when the shadows were long and deceptive. Emily was in the kitchen, slicing apples for a pie. Damien was outside, closing up the barn for the night. The dog they had adopted, a stray mutt named Buster, started barking frantically near the tree line. Then, a sharp yelp and silence. Emily froze, the knife hovering over the apple. The silence was wrong. The back door burst open. Damien stumbled in. He wasn't looking at her. He was diving for the cabinet where they kept the shotgun. "Upstairs!" he roared at her. "Go to the attic, now!" Before Emily could move, the front window shattered. A bullet tore through the kitchen, smashing a jar of flour on the counter, sending a white cloud into the air. "Damien," she screamed. "Go!" he shouted, racking the slide of the shotgun. "Hide!" Emily didn't argue. She knew her role. She was carrying the future. She had to protect it. She scrambled out of the kitchen and up the narrow stairs, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She made it to the attic, pulling the drop-down ladder up behind her. She huddled in the dark, dusty space, pressing her hands over her ears, but she couldn't block out the sounds. Downstairs, hell had broken loose. She heard shouting, Marco's voice, screaming about vengeance, about family. She heard the boom of the shotgun. She heard furniture overturning, the crash of breaking glass, the sickening thud of bodies colliding. It went on for what felt like hours, though it must have been only minutes. Then, a gunshot. Loud, final, and silence. Emily waited. She couldn't breathe. She sat in the dark, rocking back and forth, praying to a God she hadn't spoken to in years. Please, please let him be the one standing. Emma! The voice was weak, coming from the bottom of the attic hatch. Emily shoved the hatch open and scrambled down the ladder so fast she nearly fell. The kitchen was destroyed. Flour covered everything like snow. The table was overturned. Marco lay dead by the back door. Damien was sitting on the floor, leaning against the refrigerator. He was a mess. His face was battered, one eye swollen shut. His shirt was torn, and there was a deep knife wound in his side, bleeding sluggishly. "Damien," Emily cried, dropping to her knees beside him. She pressed her hands against the wound, trying to stem the flow. "I got him," Damien wheezed, a bloody smile touching his lips. "He was alone. Just him. You're hurt," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the flour dust. "Oh, God, you're hurt so bad." "I'm okay," he promised, though his skin was pale. It missed the important stuff. "Just stings a bit." She helped him up, half carrying him to the living room sofa. She retrieved the medical kit, the one they kept fully stocked for this exact nightmare. For the next hour, Emily was not a baker or a victim. She was a surgeon of necessity. She cleaned the wound with alcohol, her hands steady despite her tears. She threaded the needle and stitched his skin back together, just as she had stitched the holes in her apron years ago. Damien watched her the whole time, his good eye filled with a profound, quiet love. He didn't flinch as the needle pierced his skin. He just held her free hand, anchoring her. When she tied off the last knot and taped the gauze in place, she sat back, wiping her blood-stained hands on a towel. "We have to leave," Damien said quietly. "Someone else might come." Emily looked at him. She looked at the house they had made a home. She looked at the garden outside. She thought about the baby growing inside her. "No," she said. Damien frowned. "Emma, it is not safe." "Nowhere is safe," she said, her voice hardening. "If we run again, we're just teaching our child to run. We killed the past, Damien. Marco was the last loose end. You said it yourself. He was alone." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "No more running. No more hiding in the dark. We stay. We fight for this. Let's make this life real." Damien looked at her. Seeing the steel in her spine that matched his own, he nodded slowly. "Okay, we make it real." 3 days later, they walked down to the river that ran along the edge of their property. The morning mist was rising off the water, turning the world into a soft, white dream. The sun was just cresting the hills, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold. There were no guests. There was no priest. Just the two of them and the silence of the woods. Emily wore a simple white cotton dress she had bought in town. It wasn't a gown. It was practical, beautiful, and hers. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. Damien stood by the water's edge. He wore a clean black shirt, the stitches in his side stiff but holding. Tucked into the waistband of his trousers, at the small of his back, was his gun. It was not hidden. It was a part of him, a promise of protection. He took her hands as she approached. His knuckles were still bruised, healing purple and yellow. "I don't have vows written down," Damien said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I have this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't the diamond from her fake life as Mrs. Moretti. It was a simple gold band, old and worn. "This was my mother's," he said. "It is the only clean thing I own. With this ring, I give you my life, my protection, my past and my future. I promise to love you until the last bullet is spent and the last fire burns out." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Emily reached into her pocket. She pulled out a matching band she had bought at the pawn shop in the next town over. "I don't want a hero," she said, her voice clear in the morning air. "And I don't want a villain. I want you. I want the man who plants gardens and protects me from nightmares. I promise to stand with you, no matter what comes out of the dark. We face it together." She slid the ring onto his finger. Damien pulled her close, his hand tangling in her hair. He looked down at her with a reverence that shook her to her core. "Now," Emily whispered, smiling up at him through tears. "Now I'm really your wife." Damien smiled back, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. "You always were," he whispered. "You just didn't know it yet." He kissed her. It was a kiss of finality and beginning. The sun broke fully over the horizon, bathing them in golden light, casting long shadows behind them. They turned and walked back up the hill toward the farmhouse, hand in hand. Damien's gait was slightly uneven from his injury, but he walked tall. Emily walked beside him, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. They walked into the sunrise, safe but always watchful. They knew the world was full of wolves, and the shadows would always lengthen, but they also knew that the fire between them burned hotter than anything the darkness could bring, and that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to the final chapter of She's My Wife. It has been an incredible journey taking Emily and Damien from the hospital room to the farmhouse, and I hope you enjoyed the ride as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to hear your thoughts on the ending. Did you think they made the right choice to stay and fight for their happiness? And please, let me know in the comments where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more passionate, emotional tales, please make sure to subscribe to the Mafia Romance Stories channel. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.